Night shifters of Reddit who have witnessed paranormal activity, what happened? So, I used to work at a 24-hour subway. I know, great start to a paranormal experience story, huh? Well, one day, I was doing the dishes and my coworker was cleaning the toaster oven and bread oven. Then, out of nowhere, around 3:30 a.m., I heard our door chime go off. Out of habit, I say, "Welcome to Subway." As I turned the corner, nobody there. Coworker gone. I thought, okay, maybe he hopped the counter and went out for a cigarette, as he did from time to time. Heading back to the sink to finish the dishes, I hear the door chime again. Nobody. I check the bathrooms. Nobody. What the hell? I ignore the dishes and stand at the front counter eyeing the doors. A couple of minutes later, my coworker comes through the back door where we get our deliveries. And I say, "Where'd you go?" Turning towards the back door area. And he says, "To take out the trash." Then door chime. He does the same thing as me. "Welcome to Subway." Turns corner to see nobody there, but this time the door was wide open. Our doors are weighted to where they'll close on their own if you let go of them. The door stayed open for a couple of minutes as we stared, then suddenly slammed. Not a windy night, and our doors wouldn't even stay open like that on the windiest of days. I have no idea what caused this or why it happened on that particular night, but after, I got a different job and I was told it never happened again. Told my boss about the incident and we all looked at the cameras. Nobody could explain it. Next story. I was working at a gas station at like 3 a.m. one night, and a car pulled into the pump. Guy got out and started pumping, and then the car and the dude just vanished. I was looking right at it, and it just popped out of existence. I told my boss the next day, and she turned white as a sheet. She had seen the same thing, same exact description, same car, same pump, same guy. Okay, first off, I would like to say the Subway story, that was me. I felt like pranking some Subway employees after a bad incident, so we can chalk that up to me. As for the second story that we just read here, they ain't got cameras facing the pumps? Huh? I gotta put this one under a little scrutiny, I'm just saying. I believe in ghost stuff, but, this is a business. Where are your cameras? I don't know. Maybe it's an old rundown place. Who knows? Anyway, next story. I work the front gate at a military installation. The night shift is super dull and quiet where I'm at. For a while, I noticed this dark green old Ford Bronco that would roll up. When I would stand out the gate shack, the car would do a 180 and then leave. This happened about 2 to 3 times until I finally caught the license plate before it turned. I ran the numbers to my supervisor. He asked me if I was sure, and I said I am 100% certain. He tells me it couldn't be because the numbers lead to a vehicle crash report that involved the same exact vehicle and plate number to which the driver had died, and the vehicle was totaled. That crap made me want to switch to day shift. Next story. I was firmly against the idea of paranormal activity prior to working in an old folks' home, but you always felt watched. Always. Even when not in view of the camera, but that was the tip of the iceberg. Several times while I was working, things would fly off the walls even though it was unprovoked. I'm talking hand sanitizer containers that flew 15 feet from the wall it was on, cups that were stationary on the counter and all of a sudden flew across the room, and clipboards that just happened to all fall off the walls at once, even though they were across the room from each other. But nothing is as unsettling as Bill in 209. Bill lived in this room while he was a tenant, and while someone was visiting, they stayed in room 209. The visitor came downstairs, said that Bill had come into his room and said, "Don't worry, it's just Bill," while he was in the shower, and then asked who Bill was. We explained there was no one who lived or worked there named Bill. A couple of days later, the same visitor was cleaning out records for the care center where they worked. As they were doing so, they found that a resident named Bill had lived in room 209. When they told us this story, we all heard a knock on the window and turned to look at it. As we did so, clipboards and bulletin boards flew off the wall on the opposite wall. We've decided that Bill is friendly but likes attention. He's cool. Next story. A lab building where I once worked was the site of a murder self-unaliving, which happened while I was there. Awful and sad. We didn't have shifts per se, but I had to work late one night autoclaving equipment for the next day's experiment. I immediately opened the door and saw that all of the contents of a table in the hallway had been pushed to the floor. Water bottles, a packet of papers, pens, etc. Since I was right by the door at the time, I would have seen and or heard someone running away. It was against protocol to leave things in the autoclave overnight, so I had to stay an hour and a half to get them out. But nothing else happened. I left the stuff on the floor though. Didn't want a repeat of that. Next story. Not me, but a friend used to work as a night custodian for an elementary school, which the building itself was rather old, built in the 40s maybe? He was third shift, so he took over from the second shift guy at like 9 p.m. He was basically there to mop the floors and make sure no one broke in. If he got all of his stuff done, he was pretty much free to do whatever he wanted. After he finished doing his work, he'd hang out in an office because there was a small TV to watch. He said things started off innocently enough. Lights turning on in classrooms where he knew they'd been on previously, cabinets and doors opening and closing on their own. He didn't pay much attention to it at first. He was sort of on the fence as to where he believed in paranormal activities, so he just shrugged it off as coincidences. At first, he would go and check the noises out. Sometimes he'd creep around and try to catch someone in the act in case there was a way in that he didn't know about. After a month or so, he gave up looking and just learned to ignore it. He'd ask his boss about it and just get blown off. Over the coming months, things progressively got worse. Doors no longer closed on their own. They slammed shut. He heard noises like children playing, sometimes screaming. He'd find trash cans upside down. He'd have things thrown at him, but he would be clearly alone with nowhere for someone to hide and throw things at him. He'd contemplated quitting, but he was making good money for being nearly fresh out of high school and needed the money for family stuff, so he stuck with it. He'd come in, rush through his duties for the night as quickly as he could, and then go and sit in the office where he'd turn the TV to watch where he could sit facing the door, and that's where he'd sit until the morning crew came in at 6 a.m. He didn't want to admit that he was scared crapless of being in that school by himself at nighttime, so he tried to tough it out and made a lot of excuses to try and explain what was going on. But the last straw for him was the night he was sitting in the office watching TV and felt someone grab the chair from behind and flip him over backwards. There was clearly no one in the room and no way for anyone to get into the room without him seeing them. So he picked up the office phone, called his boss at home in the middle of the night, said he quit, and he'd come back in the morning to turn his keys in. He was definitely a believer in the paranormal after that experience. He said that it wasn't until years later that he found out from someone else who had researched the history of the school before it was torn down that there used to be a pool inside the school. Well, a number of kids had drowned in the pool in the early years of the school until the administration decided to finally expand the building, so they filled the pool in with concrete and expanded over on top of it. Guys, I don't know why, but I swear every time we read a story and there's a school mentioned and there's an old swimming pool mentioned, someone drowned or died between the 40s and the 70s. Maybe 80s, 90s, but by then, not many schools have pools anymore. At least not public schools. I don't know about you rich folks, but yeah, people just be dying in pools. Kids just drown for fun. Not real. That's horrible. Drowning is not fun. Anyway, and I don't wish it on anybody. Next story. So, I worked in a mine in northern Ontario. There was a death on the 4200 level a couple of years previous to the incident. It was a normal day underground like any other. We were rehabbing an old working that had collapsed. 4200 level was big. The drifts were 6 by 6 feet, but go on for kilometers in every direction. It was about midnight when we saw the mine rescue team with security rushing down the drift. Naturally, we dropped what we were doing and followed to see if we could help out. We arrived at a guy who was as pale as a ghost. He didn't look hurt, but was shaking uncontrollably. Mine rescue approached him, and he wouldn't have it. He would scream, and not just any scream. It was terrifying hearing the screams, like a person so consumed with fear it had a tone to it that you wouldn't imagine could come from a human being. Then eventually he just stopped screaming and just sat there, awake but non-responsive. By now, it was 3:30 a.m. and our shift was over. We couldn't leave him down there. We managed to get him on a stretcher that we could carry out, and on our way out, he kept saying, "The devil is on 42. The devil is on 42," over and over again. About 2 years later, another incident report was read to us. The exact same thing. Exactly the same spot, but a different person. I don't believe they saw the devil, but it is always in the back of my mind when I'm on 42. Next story. So I don't have a story myself, but here is the one my wife likes to tell. She is a nurse, and for a couple of years, she was working night shift in the palliative care unit, which is the comfort care/end-of-life unit. Patients in that unit are expected to die or to be sent home or to a care home to die. Anyways, those rooms also had a radio, and according to her, it happened a few times that a radio suddenly turned on, and within an hour or so, a patient would pass away. One rather busy night, the radio turned on and my wife went into the room, stared into the darkness and said, "Cut that out, I don't have time for this crap," and the radio suddenly snapped off. No patient died during the rest of her shift, but one passed away shortly after she clocked out. Next story. Used to work at IHOP. A cook before my time got shot and died during a robbery. I would always hear someone in the kitchen, such as the spatulas clanking, but nobody would be in the kitchen. Once I saw a black figure in the back, and I figured it was the cook. When I went outside to the front of the restaurant, the cook was sitting outside smoking. There were no current orders either. Other coworkers say they experienced some stories. One of them said she felt pushed, but I can't speak on what I didn't see. Next story. I don't inherently believe in ghosts, but if I had a paranormal story, it would be this one. I work in one of the major ERs in my city as an HCA. One of my many tasks is post-mortem care on patients who die in our care. One night, at around 0200, I was called to the room of an older patient who was palliative, had passed away, and the family had finished their goodbyes. So I went in to start providing care. This usually means removing any tubes, wires, and monitors from the patient, giving them a bed bath, removing any valuables from the body, they give them to the family, putting them in a gown and shroud. And I like to talk to my patients, even if they have passed, as it puts me at ease and shows respect to them. I explain my actions and talk them through what I'm doing because even though they have passed on, they are still my patient. While I was proceeding with the bed bath of the patient, out of nowhere, I felt like I was being watched. And then I felt a hand on my shoulder, and a man's voice tell me, "Thank you." The hand remained for a moment while I stood there frozen, then all the feeling stopped and the room felt empty. There were no other nurses or staff in the area at the time, just me. I like to believe that the patient I was providing care for was thankful for my explanations and me continuing to talk to them through their care. I have to say, that was a really beautiful story. All of these are spooky, and this one's still spooky in its own way, but to still talk to the person even after they passed away because OP sees them as their patient was really nice to read. I really liked hearing that. But anyway, next story. So, not a night shifter, but my dad kind of was. He was also against the idea of paranormal activity, but now agrees that sometimes there are things that cannot be explained. He was a college student working towards his doctorate in dentistry. However, due to school being expensive as hell, he had to live in a rundown apartment in the bad side of Philly. As a result, he would occasionally wake up at night since he had to scare off several attempted home invaders. Therefore, he was a light sleeper, and any kind of noise would instantly wake him up and make him do rounds around the apartment to make sure there were no intruders. After the second or third break-in, the gangs learned to stay away from the apartment due to his reputation of becoming Rambo to fight them off. But anyway, he and his roommate had an old, really freaking old refrigerator that had a light that did not work and came with the purchase. This is important to the story. The apartment building was also built in the 1960s, but had been converted to a sort of loft house with only one apartment room available for rent. The roommate and him split it into 2 living quarters, and it had a tiny kitchen, bathroom, a basement, and a barred front door with broken glass. The kitchen was directly next to the bedroom, and the walls were paper thin. So one night he heard someone moving around in the kitchen. Of course, he snatched up his hunting knife and investigated. The fridge door was open, and the light was on. An old woman wrapped in a shawl was bent over examining the contents. My dad yelled, "Hey!" She turned and snap! The light went off. She vanished, and the door of the fridge suddenly slammed shut. To this day, he has no clue who she was or what she was. Next story. Worked at a movie theater running the booths upstairs. The projectors are upstairs, obviously, in a long corridor. At nighttime, after the last showing in each theater, you shut off the lights to that theater and the small one over the projector itself. Then you cover the platters to protect from dust. It's not so bad for the first view because at least the lights of nearby projectors are still on for the theaters that are still running. But as you crap each one off one by one, the corridor gets darker and darker, and that little viewing window into each individual theater is pitch black. That dull, steady whirring noise you've toned out all night is gone and is now replaced by absolute silence. And there's hardly any light left anymore. Just the lights at the end of each corridor where you sit in between each start time. It's spooky enough is what I'm saying. But one particular night, I'm throwing the covers over one of the platters, and I casually glance up into the viewing theater window across the way, and there's a face. It's a little boy's face, and it's sheet white. I know what I saw. I'm sure there's an explanation for it, and there's nothing supernatural about it, but there was a face there, and it scared the absolute crap out of me. It made an already unsettling environment that much more terrifying the rest of the time I worked there. Also, for the record, inside the actual theater, these windows are a solid 8 to 10 feet above the seatbacks in the highest row. So if someone was playing a prank, they'd need a ladder, and even then, they'd have nowhere to set it. Next story. Night watch in the barracks at Fort Gordon. That's a night shift, right? Anyway, so many things happened in 3 different rooms that I could write a book. It completely changed my belief in paranormal activity. This one took place in the middle of the night, so this is the one I'll tell. I'm sitting by the stairwell on the 2nd floor and hear someone shouting in a room down a hallway. I'm on duty, so I run to the room and swing open the door, expecting to see some fighting. There are several people in this room pointing up to the ceiling next to a wall and telling me, "They're doing it again!" And I ask them to explain, and they tell me that ever since they moved into that room, someone lifts up the ceiling tiles and makes funny faces at them at nighttime. The latrine is on the other side of the wall, so I go over to see if anyone is there, and there isn't. So I climb onto a desk in the room to lift up the ceiling tiles to see if they're still up there. When I lift up the ceiling tiles, all I see is a cinder block wall that goes all the way to the floor above. There's only about an inch between the back of the ceiling tile and the wall. No way a face was up there. Two of the soldiers freaked out and ran out of the room and slept in the hallway. This was only the first of many incidents. Next story. I worked night shift at a hotel. I also had a day job, and the manager was cool and said I could sleep as long as I woke up if someone needed something. Well, one night I woke up and I saw a guy, well, more of a silhouette of a guy, staring at me through the windows of the Dutch door to the courtyard. He was really tall, like 6.5 feet, and had a black duster, trench coat, and a hat. As for me, I jumped up from the couch, put down the remote I'd fallen asleep with in my hand, and rushed to the door to see what he needed. But he was gone, and no sign of him anywhere in the courtyard, and there were only 2 long straight paths. He couldn't have even ran that fast. Well, I forget about it and continue my night. Fast forward about 3 weeks, and one of my coworkers is telling me about an evil spirit that lives in one of the rooms. All of the employees knew there were at least 4 haunted rooms there, as well as the elevator, seriously, and he started describing a tall, shadowy guy. I cut him off and I'm like 6 or 7 feet, black coat and a hat, and he turns white and stares at me and says, "You've seen it too?" So I tell him what happened about that incident that night and everything getting super creepy. Then, another time, at another job, I was getting ready to do security rounds, roughly around 3:15 a.m. I'm whistling the Arthur movie theme song, it had just played on the radio, and it was dead quiet except just crickets. As I open the door to the patrol car, still whistling, I hear a whistle off in the bushes. The bush is on a 60-foot cliff. It's the same tune, and the same type of whistle I have. I don't whistle normal, it's like a windier, not sharp kind of whistle, and much quieter, but it's the same exact song, same exact type of whistle. So I immediately stop, but the whistling keeps going. I get into the car to book it, take about 20 minutes longer than I normally do to get back, and I'm super careful, nervous, paranoid when I get back. But never saw anyone or anything, never heard it again. But on that note, sometimes if I fall asleep at that job, I'd wake up to the sound of my old boss shouting my name. He used to come in about the same time that I would hear the sound and wake up. That happened pretty regularly. The weird thing is that he had been dead for 3 years when it started. I feel like of all the people to be possibly haunted by, your former boss is probably one of the worst. He keeps whispering in my ears that we're a family, sending me ghost emails about a pizza party. Make it stop. Anyway, next story. So, pretty minor things. I was a custodian in ICU, 2 nurses and me on shift, and it was pretty much empty most of the time, but I have 2 stories. Doing my shift as I was cleaning the empty rooms, and every minute or so, out of the corner of my eye, the shadows move. Pretty WTF moment the first 2 times. Then, we also had a brain-dead patient ready for organ harvest. It was me and a nurse in the room when she froze. I asked if there's something wrong, and she says, "I know that's impossible, but he just moved." And yeah, pretty scary stuff, but P.S., he didn't. Next story. I am a dedicated night shift nurse. Several years ago, the unit I worked on was kinda off on its own, the oldest part of a 100-plus-year-old hospital. During some basic repairs, they found some mold and, according to rumors, asbestos in the walls, so my unit got shut down for a couple of months for repairs. They kept the nurses on whatever they could, with the result that we were occasionally really bored thanks to acting as clerks or doing random odd jobs. A coworker/friend at the time was really into ghost hunting, to the point of buying a decent quality ghost hunting kit. Thanks to not exactly being needed, we had ample time to wander the spookier corners of the hospital overnight. And we didn't find a whole lot, just the occasional EMF spike or whatever that could really easily be explained. Then, after a couple of weeks, they took down the strict construction isolation stuff for our unit, and we decided to check out some of our supposedly haunted rooms. That place was eerie AF. They had all the utilities shut off. Remember, it was separate from the rest of the hospital, and it was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. We went into one of the rooms where a lot of deaths had occurred. Thanks to being close to the nurses' station where we could put more critical patients, we set up a voice recorder, thermometer, and an EMF detector. Then we started to ask any present spirits questions, standard stuff like if they had died in the room, etc. Within a few minutes of us asking random questions, the temperature dropped a couple of degrees. Then the EMF monitor started going off in short little bursts. Right as I asked the question, "Are you angry that you died here?" the EMF squealed like a stuck pig, and we decided to get the hell out of there. The next morning, morning, we went to my place to play the audio recordings through my computer. Everything on it, our questions and the EMF noises. Right as I asked my last question of the night, there was this sound that coincided with the EMF burst that we heard in the room. It was this low, drawn-out moaning sound that sounded like an enhanced version of a death moan or rattle. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, along with the worst case of goosebumps ever. I've seen a lot of weird crap in my time as a nurse. I'm also a firm skeptic and love my peer-reviewed evidence, but I can't quite believe that recording noise/temperature drops/EMF readings were something normal that happened in an isolated unit of the hospital with all of the utilities shut off. Next story. I work on a boys unit at a mental hospital. Recently, my patients have been complaining about seeing ghosts in their rooms at nighttime, claiming they've seen things, coloring pages and art they've tapped up, fly off the walls, doors open and close by themselves, and a few patients have claimed to see full-body apparitions. Given their age and psych status, I'd usually take their stories with a grain of salt, but actually, I sort of believe them. The hospital opened as an asylum in the mid-1800s, and patients have definitely died there. Much of the original building is still used, including my unit, and honestly, when I walk around the halls at nighttime, hours after the patients have fallen asleep, it legitimately does feel like someone is always watching me. I think it's just a matter of time until I have my own ghostly encounter. Next story. I used to intern in a recording studio in New York City years ago where it was technically open 24/7, meaning there was always someone there whether clients were in or not. Anyway, it was on an upper floor of a building, and due to the amount of expensive equipment inside, you could not access that floor by elevator without someone letting you up. The button for that floor was locked out, so you couldn't press it from inside the elevator. There was also a camera at the front entrance downstairs, another at the elevator entrance, and one inside the elevator, all of which could be viewed from the front desk of the studio, so when people arrived, you would buzz them in. Wait until you saw them enter the elevator, and then you would have to push the button for the studio floor to bring the elevator up, right? Well, anyway, one of the nights I was working the overnight shift, and it was just me and another dude, doing cleaning, maintenance, etc., when we hear the elevator start running at probably like 3:30 in the morning. The whole building is all offices, so really there is nobody in the building past 5 to 6 p.m. besides us, so we thought it was a bit strange. Then the other guy looks at the cameras and there's nothing at all. No one in the elevator either. So although it's weird, we just figured someone must still be in the building and called it from a different floor. It made sense until all of a sudden we see it stop at our floor and we hear the door ding. We're both in the lobby about 15 feet away from the elevator, and we give each other the hardest WTF stare ever. And I can't explain how much I didn't want those doors to open. We stare like a deer in headlights, completely motionless at the door as they open, and nobody's in there. No one pushed the button, nothing. We both keep staring completely still and silent, and it becomes really effing creepy as the time goes on and the doors don't shut, as if something is standing in the doorway blocking the sensor. The doors usually close after 5 seconds or so, but we stared at it for a good 20 to 30 seconds or so before they closed and the elevator returned back to the lobby. We stared for a bit longer before simultaneously looking at each other and saying, "What the F, dude?" The next day, we asked a couple of the other guys about it, and one of the guys said the same thing happened to him in the middle of the night when he was there by himself. He said he almost crapped himself. Maybe there's a logical explanation for it, elevator malfunction, etc., but it was really damn freaky since the place was generally kinda creepy and night, and there had been some other weirder things. Next story. I have 2 stories. My first overnight job was as a train dispatcher in VT. The center was in a train station that was about 100 years old. Now, maybe being on day 6 on the extra board made me quiet, but I saw a person standing in front of the restrooms at like 4 a.m. White guy in his 40s dressed semi-formal. Many coworkers would find items like that. Then second instance was when I worked overnights at a mental health crisis house. It's a home-like setting that's a step below inpatient for mental health issues. It also provided a place for people at risk of relapsing to stay at to have support. But anyway, there was one room in the place where people would get weird vibes about. I would do a room check and get the feeling I was being watched each time. Another staff member reported stomping upstairs, hearing voices and sudden temperature changes in the room. This room also had the highest rates of self-injury and bump-ups, sending clients to inpatient or calling police if violent. But I tried to sage and salt the room at one time, even did the bang on pots asking it to leave. It started to do more stomping when I was there. There were times there would be no clients in the house, so I could sleep on the couch in between calls. I started to have a lot more lucid dreams dreams and sleep paralysis after trying to get rid of it. But what I found interesting is how many different cultures would come in and out of the house, and if someone was spiritually connected, they would pick up on the vibe something is up with the room. We had Kabbalah, Santeria, New Age, Catholic, you name it, they all picked up that something was weird about that place. Next story. So, secondhand story here, and just to be clear, I don't believe in paranormal activity as personally I've never witnessed anything I can't explain through other more likely events. In any case, in the house I grew up in, my sister always said there was a ghost, usually being described as an elderly old man in a flap cap who was never frightening or aggressive. He was also apparently just a friendly old man. When we moved out, the person who we sold it to was a personal friend of my mother who planned to renovate the house to sell on. We found out that one of the younger apprentices who was working on the house a couple of times passed by an elderly man on the stairs, and one time he did this, then turned to ask who he was as he realized he had never spoken to the fellow, assuming he was a part of the team who was also working on the renovation. Then when he turned after passing him on the stairs one time, he had just vanished. When he asked one of the senior workermen who he was, they told him there was no one there with that description. The next time he saw him again, he did the same thing, passed him while walking through the house, and he'd turn to ask who he was, and he would just disappear. The apprentice ran from the house and refused to enter it again. We found out when he gave a proper description of the man, it was exactly the same as my sister used to describe. Very strange indeed, and not something I can easily explain away, but then again, I never personally saw him or experienced it, so take it as you will. Next story. Not during a night shift, but on a bleak, stormy day with just as much spooky potential as one, I was alone in the kitchen, sandwich shop, when I spotted a customer in the lobby. Never heard him come in. The door is pretty squeaky and closes hard, so it's difficult to miss someone walking in even without a bell like most businesses have. But his back was to me, facing the opposite wall, standing in the middle of the room. I never saw his face, but he seemed to be an older man, 70s. I greeted him with a hello, but he didn't reply. The stillness and the way he stood there, coupled with how he was facing away from me in dim lighting — it had been hot and humid out before the storm, so we had minimal lighting on to try and keep cool — really gave me kind of a Blair Witch vibe in retrospect. But at the time, I waved it off as him looking out the window or something while he decided what he wanted. Plus, I'm used to rude customers, so I wasn't surprised by him ignoring me. So I turned away to wash my hands so I'd be ready to throw together his sandwiches once he was ready to order. I'd had my back turned 20 seconds. Yes, this was during COVID, so I was counting. And when I turned back around, he was gone. Again, I never heard the heavy door open or close, and the only other door he could have left through was close enough to me that I would have absolutely noticed. He never came back, and I don't see why anyone would come into a sandwich shop for 30 seconds, just stare at the wall opposite the front counter, and then leave without a word. Also, now that I think about it, he didn't even look wet, and it was pouring outside. So, I'm not really one to believe in ghosts, but silent old man with Blair Witch vibes plus dark and stormy day plus appearing and disappearing without a sound equals I definitely saw a ghost that day. Next story. Not necessarily night shift, but I used to work in a bar that was next door to a funeral director's. Not only was it next door, it had actually previously been part of the funeral director's, and the welcome slab outside had the director's name and year carved into it, like Ferguson's 1891. In Scotland, so we were only open until 1 a.m. at the latest. There were a few different events though. Nothing uber scary, but the whole vibe of the place when you were on your own was so unsettling. Nighttime routine would mean one staff member would be downstairs counting tills, and the other would be in the venue cleaning everything. I remember one night I was polishing the bar taps and I saw someone standing behind me in the reflection. I spun around so quickly to no one being there and messaged my coworker to come upstairs. She called out for me from the bottom of the stairs before she even got my message, and when we reunited, she said she heard me coming up and down the stairs multiple times. The weirdest part is she was counting cash 2 levels down from me, and I hadn't been down one set of stairs at all, never mind 2. But continuing, this place also had 2 sets of stairs that led nowhere, and in our wine cellar, we had a massive old iron door that had a wheel to open it. I'm not sure about what it was for, but the wine racks were over it anyway, preventing you from trying to open it. In the girls' toilets, there was a bit that looks like it'd be a window, but was boarded up and below street level. It was just a board over a sharp 13-foot drop in some weird underground alley thing. One night, after locking up, we stayed behind for a couple of drinks, and one of my coworkers was dared to jump down. She did, was fine, and we were all laughing. But she went so quiet all of a sudden and started freaking out, asking us to help her get her out. When we did, she was just quiet and went home, and a few days later eventually said she felt someone touching her arm. Not a gentle brush, but like someone had put their palm on her forearm and wrapped their hand around it. Next story. My father was transferred to a remote location, a less developed state with a lot of tribal population. Everyone we knew said that when they first came to that city, they had nightmares for weeks. My family, my dad's colleagues, friends, everyone. I didn't though. I was the only one who didn't. Maybe people who were more superstitious experienced it? I don't know. Psychologically influencing yourself and others? Stuff like that? I don't know. Next story. While working at a psych ward every morning at about 2 a.m., there would be the sound of someone running down the main service hallway, followed by the same door at the end slamming. One time I kept a close eye on the area, but when I was distracted for a few seconds, the footsteps began, but when I got to the area, there was nothing. According to one of the managers, that had happened for several years, always at the same time, every morning, and most believed it was a ghost of one of the deceased clients. Another time, all the battery-powered wall clocks in the unit spun around a few times simultaneously. That was freaky, and everyone in the area screamed. Next story. Not night shift, just a regular dude, and I don't really believe in the paranormal, but had this one thing happen that I have zero explanation for. I've also told this story on Reddit before. I was a teenager studying for major secondary school exams, so one weekend my parents, brother, and grandparents went to a function and I was home alone. For reference, because of the country I live in, our house has steel grills in front of every door and window, like a prison. My room is at the front of the house. So it's something like 9:30 p.m. or 10 p.m., and I head to the kitchen, which is at the opposite end of the house. It also houses the stairs to the second floor, which is where my parents' and my brother's rooms are. As I'm getting something from the fridge, I hear my mom yell my name, so I say, "Coming," and I start going up the stairs. 2 steps up, I remember that makes no effing sense because I'm home alone. I call out to whatever, and I hear my name again. F that so hard. I don't generally run, but I sprinted back to my room and locked the door. After a couple of minutes, when I think I've lost my mind and was hearing things, I decide to head back to the kitchen. And as I get to my door and unlock it, as if on cue, I hear footsteps in the passageway. Again, F that. Relock the door, grab something off my desk to defend myself, and hide under my bed. Then, footsteps at my door. Waited for damn near half an hour under the bed until my parents called to say they were almost home. Went to open up the place so they could get in, and nothing was unlocked or broken. So it sure as hell wasn't a person. It's roughly 12 or so years later, I still have no clue what went on that night. Next story. Oh yeah, I used to work in a grocery store from 2015 to 2017. I posted a while ago, but F it, I'll post it again. And well, not so much as scary, but really unsettling. And this was at an old grocery store I used to work at. There would be several nights where I would see shadows or apparitions out of the corner of my eye, whether I was sweeping the aisle floors or cleaning the store's meat department. Would even see silhouettes of really strange crap in the meat department. Stuff would get knocked off shelves despite not being capable of it, like a box of rice that is pushed back to where even if it did fall over, it would still have plenty of shelf space to catch it. Then a constant feeling of being watched or hearing voices when there was no one there, especially if I worked a solo night and former coworkers who also worked alone heard the same things, would even swear they would hear us despite not being there. Then footsteps being heard coming up the stairs, coming up to the employee break room, even if all of us were there or if it was a solo night for any of us. Equipment would be moved or shift around slightly. Once witnessed a mop handle stand up on its own for 3 seconds and then readjust itself despite no real force capable of doing it. Would often see people inside windows looking at us, and there was no one out at that time of night. Guy I used to work with asked me if I was playing a joke on him when I was cleaning off the bandsaw in the meat department. Told him no, I was cleaning the machine while I had my headphones in listening to BBC on NPR. Well, he told me he had heard footprints walking behind him on the floor while he was mopping near the cash registers, and he felt like someone was watching him. And the next night was rife with activity, and we even found a footprint that didn't match our shoes at all. There was no evidence of someone else breaking in or being locked in with us either. It was in a part where there was mop water from cleaning a caked-in spill because we were constantly being left with any cleaning. Then I got a creepy one here. When I was working a solo night and was cleaning the meat department, during the middle of the cleaning while hosing off the meat cut preparation table, saw the plastic door entries all over move on their own. And if one of those is opened, the whole air of the room feels it, and all of those other plastic ones move on their own. Can especially use this to tell if coworker was about to sneak up on me and try to jump scare me, especially if it was night and we were all on edge afterwards. But there was no one there. I looked all around and it was pretty much empty anywhere, and I swear when I left briefly to gather my bearings, I saw someone out of the corner of my eye walking around in there. And later on, when I finished cleaning it and turned turned off the lights, I saw the deli slicer moving around on its own, as if someone were trying to mess with it. Then this is my former night shift supervisor's experiences who said, "Well, here is a couple that I remember. Right before you guys came in one night, I remember I was making sure till amounts were correct for the turned-in tills at the main safe, and as I did that, I heard footsteps behind me, and I looked around twice, saw no one there, and everyone had gone home. So I brushed it off, albeit a little freaked out, but I carried on trying to push it out of my mind, and not even 2 minutes after that, I heard a loud, menacing male voice shout out, 'You effing B-word!' in my ear, and I quickly looked around and saw nobody there. I just left it alone until you guys got there because I was too scared to continue." Another one I remember is Trip, one of our employees, had already showed up and was upstairs talking to his girlfriend on the phone, and I was facing or something. I can't remember what it was, but it was in the cereal aisle, and as I was doing so, I remember clear as day I saw a box of Frosted Flakes that was in the way back just launch itself right off the shelf and hit the floor without bouncing or anything. It just hit the ground flat, which freaked me out. And then 20 minutes later, I saw Trip run into the meat room and yell at whoever was in there to get the F out of there, the store is closed, because he saw the plastic doors move there on their own. And we both obviously know when someone goes in there through the doors since it makes them all sway and weave. I asked Trip what that was about afterwards, and he said he saw someone go in the meat room and thought it was a customer who was well known for being a jackass going in there to try to get a rack of rotisserie ribs or a chicken, but there was absolutely nobody there. And that's what my old manager had to say. Back to more of my own experiences, when me and Trip worked together, we would often see shadow figures dart across the aisles in a split second, especially if we were looking directly down the aisle. And it wasn't just bad lighting. The lights had actually been changed out a week prior. Then a jug of Tide was knocked off a second shelf and it was tucked in the back, and both me and Trip stumbled upon it and neither of us saw it or heard it fall. Nothing was broken either. Sometimes the music that was kept on all the time and playing through the intercom system would cut out briefly, as if someone was about to call or make an announcement, but all we would hear is the little ping it made, and only once did we hear something of what sounded like a woman make what sounded like a quick, and it quickly faded out. We rushed up to the front of the store and saw nothing. We looked all around and checked each other's phones, and even the one by the offices and the service center, and nothing was out of place. Then this one happened with anyone who was working in the meat room or outside the meat room would see shadow figures in it, whether the lights were off or on. Would also see carts used for moving tubs that also had slabs of meat to be prepared and packaged get moved from their original spot after we had cleaned them. Would hear equipment shuffling too. We would also see faces looking at us out of the corner of our eyes through the windows. So I think we can all agree that story was very long, but the conclusion is, place is haunted. Meat place is haunted. Now, who is haunting it, you may be wondering? Is it employees who died there or former employees with garnished wages? No, hear me out. I think the meat shop is haunted by vegan ghosts. Vegetarian ghosts. Hippie ghosts are haunting the meat place. That's a new one. I bet you didn't expect that. Anyway, next story. So I am in law enforcement. Me and my partner get sent to a call for an alarm activation. No big deal, but this is not one of our usual alarms. It's a new one we've never been to before. Takes us longer than normal to find the house because it's way back off the road and no lights are on. We finally find the place and it's super creepy. Spider webs everywhere, nothing outside the house like a trash can or knickknacks. We split up per the usual, check the outside for open doors or windows. I go one way, he goes the other. The house, it's 2 stories. And I get to this sort of garage carport looking thing, along with a locked shop of some sort on the first floor. Nothing weird seen or heard. Partner is still making his way around to me from where we started. I find the stairs to the second floor and I head up. I wind up on a giant covered porch attached to the house, and it's huge. Literally the size of the carport below with about 4 seats of wicker outdoor furniture. I'm looking around, don't see anything super weird. Partner finally gets to me upstairs, and we talk about the weird layout for a minute. During this time, I feel slightly unsettled, but I'm unsure why. I start looking a little closer through the sliding glass doors at the front of the house. Partner tells me everything is locked up from his side, and there's even vines growing over some windows and doors. I start noticing little things in the living room. The carpet looks like it's from 1962. No TV, no electronics in general, very 60s layout. I thought all of that was weird, but I've seen weirder on this job. I then ask dispatch what the alarm activation was, and I get told attic exit. Super weird and very specific, but okay. So we start looking around best we can in the living room. No attic. Then it occurs to me, what if it's outside in this giant covered porch? I look up. Sure enough, directly above me is an attic. I can't even see the alarm sensor boxes on it. I look at my partner and I tell him I'm not going up. He suggests we rock, paper, scissors for it, and I'm an idiot and I agree, and I lose. So I'm going up in the attic. At this point, we've made jokes about how weird all of this is. I'm slightly unsettled but haven't said anything, and I've literally never seen an attic outside that has alarms. Also, who leaves their house looking like it's in the 60s? Anyway, I reluctantly pull my gun out and start climbing the ladder. I should mention I'm chubby. Attics and ladders aren't my friends. I stick my head up just far enough to see there are no people and not a lot of stuff up there. And it smells really weird. It smells like old people have been living up there for 20 years. Like dead old people. But no actual dead body, thankfully. But like the smell of old people has died up there. I quickly come back down with nothing but the weird smell to report. I shrug it off as we go to leave. Then partner pulls up next to me, jokingly saying, "We're looking at this all the wrong way. We weren't looking for someone getting into the attic. We should have been looking for something getting out." And we both laugh it off as a weird call, weird job, and then drive off. As we drive back to our hiding spot a mile or so away, me in front of him in separate cars, I see what looks like a person standing in the roadway out of the corner of my eye. It looked like a black female wearing dark clothing holding a light-colored bag, though I only saw the person for a split second. I'm not 100% sure of what I saw, so I wait and see if partner says anything about it. A few seconds later, after I pass whatever I saw, partner calls out over the radio that he and I are getting out with a person in the roadway at a given intersection. I turned around with him. This all happens within probably 20 seconds. We turn around and can't find the person. Person vanished completely. We described the person to each other and both definitely saw it and saw the same thing. No idea where person/thing went. It was less than half a mile from the creepy house. And so, we're pretty sure that we're both haunted now, thanks to work. We've had one more instance of weird, unexplained happenings at work. We attribute it to our ghost, so that's the story of how I became haunted and ran into a ghost that I accidentally released. Next story. I work at a Walmart. When I started working apparel on the night shift, the others in that department started trying to spook me with tales about it being haunted and yada yada yada. I didn't really care. You see, I grew up in a haunted house, so ghost stories didn't really bother me. And then, we actually experienced something. I was like, neat. But one of the ones who'd been trying to spook me freaked right the F out. It was hilarious. She and I had been standing about 5 or 6 feet apart talking to each other. The store had closed at midnight and we were the only ones in apparel. Right between us, both of us heard a female voice as clear as day. I only heard the voice, but no words. My coworker said she heard words, but she was so freaked out she never told me what she heard exactly. Next story. I used to be a manager at a local movie theater and we had some spookery afoot. The theater was relatively new, as was the road it was on. The area was developed in the late 90s, but before the area was developed, it had been farmland. The street that the theater was at, as well as a bunch of shopping centers and a Walmart, was where an old farmhouse was. And sadly, very much like a horror movie, the farm had been home to a very brutal family murder. The father killed the whole family and then took his own life. So I started working at the theater in 2007, and immediately, new employees were told about the ghosts. I've worked in a bunch of places and most have some legend of a haunting, but every single employee affirmed that A, the theater was haunted, B, there were multiple ghosts, and C, they were so prevalent that you would get used to it very quickly. And they were not wrong. Theater 12 was the most haunted place in the theater. It was a benevolent haunting. It never seemed malicious, but it was certainly there. A girl died in there in the second year of the theater being open. She fell from the row of the seats above the ramp way into the theater and landed on her head. She was playful, and once you accepted that there was a ghost, it didn't really bother you. She would knock armchairs down, ushers had to walk through and put them all up, and open and close doors she would. The first time I really accepted she was there involved those damn armchairs. I had just gone and put them all up when one fell down. I put it back up, and the armchair next to it fell. Then, the whole row fell. Scary, but once you figured it was a kid playing, it was somehow less scary. She'd also listen if you told her you were scared, she would stop. Then, the upstairs was haunted by a man. Nobody knew who that was, but everyone thought it was the dad that killed the family. All I know is that one was angry. The girl was playful, and you never felt scared when her things were happening. She wasn't stuck in Theater 12, but that's where she was most prevalent. The one upstairs slammed doors, held doors closed when you were trying to leave, and constantly turned lights on and off. The lights were the worst part, though. The upstairs booth was one long room with all of the projectors and the lights were on each side of the room, so when they went out, you had a 30-ish second walk to turn them back on. You could just feel someone there with you, and it was the feeling of being in a room with someone that is very angry with you, but not saying anything. People said they saw things fly across the room or off of desks, and I never saw that, but the lights and the doors were enough. There were various other things, and if anyone's interested, I can post more. Next story. I used to work as a security guard at a hospital in Bowmanville, Ontario, Canada. This particular hospital was split in half by the old hospital, built in the late 1800s, and the new part of the hospital. Well, one night I was doing my rounds when I decided to walk down this long corridor next to the main entrance of the old hospital. They store all of the wheelchairs down this long hallway, and as I round the corner to walk down the corridor, I see a woman standing there at the end of the hallway. She was wearing a long blue button-up coat, black shoes, and some kind of winged bowler hat. She honestly scared the crap out of me, so I closed my eyes and looked away for a moment. When I turned back, she was gone. A few days later, I was walking down the entrance hallway of the new hospital and stopped to look at some old hospital photos hanging on the wall. Then I see a picture from the opening of the original wing and notice the same woman from the night before standing in the middle of all of those nurses dressed in white. She was a head nurse or something like that. Sent a big shiver down my spine. Next story. In college, I worked a night shift from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. In the middle of it, I would often take a break to run home and eat there. I lived on the top floor of an 11-story high-rise at that time. The building was built in the early 1920s and had a reputation of being haunted. And so, when I had ghostly run-ins during my break, it was always the same. I would leave my apartment on the 11th floor and hit the lobby floor button. If an off-ride was going to happen, the elevator would stop at the 7th floor. When the doors opened on the 7th floor, no one would be there. Once the doors closed, instead of opening at the lobby, the elevator would drop down to the basement level, which required key access. When the doors opened in the basement, the doors would open and reveal a long, dark hallway with dim green lights at the other end of the hall. The energy would feel completely off, and I would clench my eyes until the doors closed and the elevator took me back up to the lobby. After looking into the history of the building, I found several accounts of hauntings. Apparently, in the early history of the building, several prostitutes were found dead in the basement. Then I thought that perhaps there actually was someone or something entering the elevator on floor 7. Next story. Damn, I got late here. But I used to live on site at an 18th century historic home and museum previously owned by a founding father. There were 3 or 4 of us that had houses on the property, and the rule was someone had to be there 24/7, 365 to respond to any issues, securing the property at close, dealing with trespassers, fire/burglar alarms, etc. And I have many stories about the weird stuff that happened there. But this one is my favorite because it was witnessed by myself and 2 police officers, documented in a police report and recorded in alarm logs. So, got a call in the middle of the night from the alarm company. Someone had definitely broken into the historic house. They managed to get in without setting off an alarm, but had triggered 4 motion detectors in succession on the 2nd floor. Given the situation, I had them dispatch the police and I met them outside. We didn't see an obvious point of entry, so 2 officers stayed outside in case the burglar tried to run, and I went in with the 2 others. They started clearing rooms from the basement up while I checked the alarm system for any faults. I met back up with them on the 1st floor. They were both standing at the foot of the main staircase, flashlights pointing up to a chair, which was right on the edge of the top stair. Then Officer 1 says, "Is that supposed to be there?" And I say, "No, it should be in the first room on the left." "Well, the motion detectors, were they the only ones between that room and this chair?" "Yeah, they were." And then Officer 2 says, "Man, I'm not going up there. None of our stuff works on ghosts." So the one officer cleared the 2nd floor while I put the chair back, and the other officer stood at the foot of the stairs. After re-alarming the building, we all gathered at one of the patrol cars to write an incident report. We came up with something about a raccoon getting in through the attic. It didn't make any sense, but it was better than, I don't know, ghost moved a chair. The next day, I had to turn the incident report into the museum's director. He read it and was immediately like, "Oh, yeah, that wasn't a raccoon. Was it really cold when you got to the top of the stairs?" Yes, it was. Next story. I've told this elsewhere before, but may fit here better. I did security on night shift for 3 months. One of the accounts was an old building that got renovated after being vacant for so many years into an assisted living facility. Everyone in town swore it was haunted, but no one could actually say yes or no. The doors were also alarmed, so it would call out over the radio which ground floor door was opened. So one night I just got done calling it into base that rounds were good, when suddenly the alarm for one of the doors went off. The nurse and myself got to the door within 30 seconds and it was not opened. It was still locked. No one was outside. We shut the alarm off and I called it in. So we did a full top to bottom sweep and room count, all residents and staff accounted for, base calls in to make sure we were clear. Still, no way to explain it because you literally had to unlock the door and open it at least 1 foot, 30 centimeters to even trigger said alarm. Next story. I think so? There might be a logical explanation for this, but I can't think of one. Also, it's weirdly mundane. So if this is my brush with supernatural forces, I don't really know how to feel about it. So I used to work in an old folks' home doing night shifts. One of the small miscellaneous jobs the night shift staff had to do was unload the dishwasher in the little kitchen area for the residents and make sure all of the dishes were neatly put away in the correct cupboards. So one night I get to unloading the dishwasher and realize somebody has put a bowl in there, facing upwards. I'm mildly annoyed at whoever did this, but get to packing the mugs into their cupboard above the dishwasher. As a short woman, I'm having to get on my tiptoes and stretch to put the last few mugs in the cupboard, but then one of the mugs falls. I'm focusing in, making sure the other mugs in the cupboard are stable so I don't see where the mug lands, but I hear smashing ceramics, so I know it's smashed. I secure the mugs and I go to assess the damage. To my surprise, the smashing sound I hear wasn't the mug, it was the bowl. It split nearly into 3 pieces. I get to cleaning it up and realize there are no pieces of this mug anywhere. Apparently it's disappeared somehow. I look around for a bit trying to work out where this mug landed, but I can't find it anywhere. I know they're not mixed up with the pieces of the bowl because the split in the bowl is so neat. I could piece it back together and there are no pieces with a handle. I look around for some time and I can't find any pieces of that dang mug. Eventually, I just had to give up on it. I haven't worked there for a few years, but I've recently wondered if one of my old coworkers ever opened up that dishwasher and found a smashed mug at the bottom. Like it traveled forwards in time somehow? I don't know why I immediately jumped to time-jumping mug, but I'm going with it. You know what, guys? The time-traveling mug has made me realize we need to do a time travel story on this channel, some supernatural time travel stuff. There was my grandpa, but he died 8 years ago. How is he right there? Okay, stuff like that. And let's be honest, how many time travel videos have you heard about on this channel? That would be something cool and new and unique, and we need to do that. Anyway, I'll talk to the people that be. I got you guys. But guys, we're at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching, commenting. Have a really good day, and bye-bye!